He said he couldn't be the friend who just kept waiting anymore, and within a week he was gone from my life for good. It wasn't until he stopped waiting that I finally understood how much I loved him. I met Jason on my very first day of college, the same day I met Michael, who would later become my husband. The three of us became inseparable almost instantly, sitting together in every lecture, cramming for exams through the night, showing up as a trio at every party on campus. Michael was the one who always drew attention in a room, loud laugh, confident in every conversation, always knowing exactly what to say. Jason was different. He could sit quietly for hours listening to everyone else talk, but when he did speak, every word carried weight. I chose Michael during our sophomore year, and Jason took it surprisingly well, at least on the surface. He never said a single word against it, kept being our closest friend, showed up for every milestone we celebrated together. It took me years to fully understand what that must have actually cost him. Michael and I got married 3 years after graduation and built a house on the edge of town, not far from where Jason had grown up. The first few years of marriage felt happy, at least that's how it seemed to me at the time. But slowly Michael started changing, becoming more withdrawn, irritable over small things, staying late at work without much explanation. Our conversations shrank down to logistics and errands, and I started to feel like I was living next to someone I no longer really understood. Jason saw all of it up close. He came over every weekend, helped fix things around the house whenever something broke, drove my daughter Emma to her activities whenever Michael and I were both tied up with work. He never once commented on my marriage, never gave advice I hadn't asked for, he just stayed present, steady and dependable, like an unshakable part of my life that I honestly took for granted. 2 years ago, Michael died suddenly from a heart attack at work. I was 32, my daughter had just started first grade, and the whole world lost its footing all at once. I barely remember the months right after the funeral clearly, it's mostly a fog of exhaustion, paperwork, and trying to hold things together for my kid. Jason was the one who actually kept me afloat during that time. He helped me with all the legal paperwork after Michael's death, picked Emma up from school on the days I couldn't get out of bed, brought groceries over when I forgot to eat. In the evenings he'd often sit with me at the kitchen table, sometimes we talked for hours, sometimes we just sat there in silence, and that silence was maybe the most valuable thing anyone gave me during that whole period. 2 years passed. Emma settled into school, I went back to work full-time, and life slowly started taking some kind of new shape. One day a coworker introduced me to a man named David from another department. He started asking me out for coffee, then dinner, and I thought maybe it was finally time to try opening up to someone new. The night I went on my first real date with David, Jason stayed home with Emma, like he'd done countless times before. When I got back, he was sitting on the front porch waiting for me, and something about the way he was sitting, the tension in his shoulders, told me this evening was going to be different from all the others. "How'd it go?" he asked as I walked up. "Good," I said, sitting down beside him on the steps. "David's a nice guy." Jason nodded, staring off into the dark yard, then suddenly started talking like he couldn't hold it in anymore. "Rachel, I've been quiet for 15 years. Since the day we met freshman year." I froze. "Jason, what are you?" "Let me get through this once," he cut in, gentle but firm. "I love you. I loved you when you chose Michael, and I stayed quiet because I wanted you happy. I loved you through your whole marriage, even when I could see you weren't happy, and I stayed quiet because it wasn't my place. I loved you when you were grieving him, and I stayed quiet because you needed support, not my feelings dumped on top of your grief." He paused for a moment, like he was gathering the strength for the last part. "But tonight, while you were out on a date with another man, I sat here and realized I can't stay quiet anymore. Not because I blame you, you have every right to a new kind of happiness. But because I can't keep being the guy who just waits around, never asking for anything. Why didn't you ever tell me before?" I asked quietly, my voice barely holding steady. "Because I was afraid of losing even what we had," he said. "Our friendship. Your trust. Afraid the truth would wreck everything instead of letting me at least stay in your life in some form." I didn't say anything, because I didn't fully understand what I was feeling in that moment either. "I've been offered a position in another city," he said suddenly. I've been going back and forth about it for a while, but now I know I have to take it. For my own sake. I can't keep living near you knowing I'll never work up the nerve to say this again, and knowing you might never feel the same way back. You've already decided, was all I could manage. Yeah, he said quietly. I leave in a week. He looked at me for a long moment, like he was trying to memorize every detail of my face, then said softly, I hope you're happy, Rachel. I really do. And then he stood up and walked to his car, and I stayed sitting there on the porch steps, watching until his taillights disappeared down the street. For the first few weeks after Jason left, I tried hard not to think about that night on the porch. I kept seeing David, went to dinner with him, introduced him to Emma, tried to convince myself this was exactly the new life I needed. David really was a good man, attentive, calm, he got along well with my daughter and never pushed me toward anything serious before I was ready. But something felt off, and it got clearer with every passing week. When David held me, I'd sometimes catch myself thinking about how Jason used to sit with me at the kitchen table those nights after Michael died, how he knew how to stay silent exactly when silence was what I needed most. When David told me about his day, I'd think about how Jason used to drive Emma to practice every Saturday, never once complaining, never expecting a thank you for it. 4 months passed since he left, and one evening, when David took me out to celebrate our 3-month anniversary, I suddenly realized I felt nothing special about the date. Just another evening, another dinner, another conversation about nothing in particular. Driving home that night, I finally asked myself honestly whether I missed David when we weren't together. And the answer was no, not even a little. I didn't miss David. But I still wasn't letting myself think about who I actually did miss. 2 more months went by, 6 months total since Jason had left the city. One evening, after Emma had gone to bed, I was scrolling through social media without any real purpose, the way you do sometimes, and a photo of Jason caught my eye. He was standing next to a woman I didn't recognize, smiling, and the caption mentioned some event in the new city where he now lived. I felt it physically, a sharp pull somewhere in my chest, sudden and uncomfortable, like someone had squeezed my heart in their fist. I stared at that photo for a long time, at his smile aimed at someone who wasn't me, and I suddenly understood with complete clarity what I hadn't let myself acknowledge for months. I was jealous. Genuinely, painfully jealous of a woman I didn't even know, just because she was standing next to Jason in the place where I used to stand, in our friendship, in our quiet understanding of each other. And in that second, everything clicked into place. I loved him. Not as a friend, not as the person who'd always shown up for me in a crisis, but as the man I wanted next to me for the rest of my life. I didn't sleep that night. I ran through every memory of him in my head, how he'd held my hand at Michael's funeral when I could barely stand, how he'd made Emma laugh during those first weeks without her dad, how he always found exactly the right words when I needed them most. And I understood that for 15 years he had really been fighting for me, quietly, patiently, without ever once demanding anything back, and I had never truly seen it until the moment he finally gave up and walked away. The next morning I called David and told him the honest truth, that I couldn't continue our relationship because my heart belonged to someone else entirely. He was disappointed but understanding about it, wished me well, and said he was glad I'd been honest with him. That same day I found Jason's new address through some mutual friends, asked my mom to watch Emma for the weekend, and got in my car. The drive took almost 5 hours, and the whole time I rehearsed in my head what I'd say to him, even though I knew that when it came down to it, the words would find their own way out. I got there late in the evening and knocked on the door of his new apartment. When he opened it and saw me standing there, his face showed a mix of surprise, worry, and something like hope that he was clearly trying to hide. Rachel? Did something happen? Is Emma? Emma's fine, I cut him off quickly. That's not why I'm here. He stepped aside, letting me into the apartment, visibly thrown off. Then why? I stood in the middle of his new living room, my heart pounding so hard I worried he could hear it in the silence. I saw your photo online. With that woman. He tensed up. Rachel, it's nothing serious, we're just. I was jealous, I said flatly, cutting him off. I saw that photo and felt real, painful jealousy, and that's when I finally understood what I'd been missing for 15 years. I took a step closer to him. Jason, I love you. Not as a friend. I love you in a way I probably should have understood a long time ago, if I hadn't been so blind to my own feelings. He looked at me for a long moment, tears forming in his eyes that he didn't even try to hide this time. Are you sure? I don't want to end up waiting again for something that's never going to happen. I'm sure, I said firmly. I ended things with David this morning. I drove 5 hours to get here because I couldn't stand the thought of losing you forever because of my own blindness. Give us a chance, Jason. Please. He stepped toward me, took my face in his hands like he was afraid this might turn out to be a dream, and said quietly, 15 years I've been waiting to hear you say that. And then he kissed me, and in that kiss was everything, 15 years of quiet waiting, all the pain of the last few months apart, and a promise that things would finally be different from here on out. A year has passed since then. Jason and I got married last spring, a small wedding in the backyard of that same house where he once sat on the porch and said goodbye to me for what he thought was forever. Emma was thrilled, she'd always loved Jason like family, and now she officially calls him Dad. And 2 months ago, the doctor confirmed something we'd both been hoping for, I'm expecting our second child, and when I told Jason the news, he just wrapped his arms around me without a word, and in that silence, like always, there were more words than any language could have found.